We're doing it! The video that I have been dreading since update 2.8.0 has launched, and that is everything about swords. Now, if you saw the patch notes last week, you probably skimmed over a very large section just devoted to swords. Swords have changed completely. Now, don't get too crazy about it. It's still a sword. You still pick it up and whack people with it. Throne cleaver is still quite medieval. And at the end of the day, I think all of us just want to kill some aliens with a big hunk of steel, right? I mean, come on. Now, today, guys, we're going to talk about what has changed with these swords, which swords seem to have changed the most, and how this is going to potentially change future god rolls for your swords. Now, I say future god rolls as we will most likely grab a list of swords after testing out more of these rolls, because not only did the swords change themselves, but many of the perks that are found on swords also got adjusted in update 2.8.0. So first up, let's just talk a little bit about swords and their new guard ability. Swords could always guard, but it used to require ammo, which is why no one ever guarded. On top of that, depending on how much damage you took, this would result in you burning more and more ammo. And if you're like the rest of the Destiny players, you would rather die than burn your ammo trying to stay alive. Well, look no further, because guarding now uses up a new feature called sword energy. Now, it still requires one ammo to be present on your sword in order to begin guarding, but your guard feature only consumes that sword energy meter that is found in the melee slot while wielding your sword. Now, depending on the attack that you block while guarding will affect how much sword energy is actually depleted. And upon depleting all of your sword energy, you can no longer block anymore until that sword energy has refilled, which takes us to a stat bar on swords that no one ever gave a damn about. Guard efficiency. Guard efficiency actually allows us to guard efficiently. Don't you love it, man? A hammer hammers, a drill drills, and guard efficiency allows us to guard efficiently. Now, guard efficiency, which is found on my throne cleaver, has a stat of 53, which somehow equates to me being able to guard for a full 3.57 seconds before my sword energy is fully depleted. Now, that's 3.57 seconds without taking damage. If you're standing underneath a boss and you start guarding, you'll notice as you take damage, and depending on how much damage you take, that sword energy will deplete even faster, which seems to be tied to a stat that no one cared about either, called defense. Now, this term's kind of subjective. I have no idea exactly how defense equates to how much damage you can tank. All we know is that things like burst guard, enduring guard, balance guard, heavy guard, sword master's guard, all of these guards affects all of these stats. And even though damage values are important on a sword, defense and guard efficiency are just as important. Now, upon fully depleting that sword energy, we now have another stat that we have to give a damn about called charge time. Yes, all swords actually have a charge time now, similar to something like fusion rifles. The difference being, though, the higher the charge time, the faster your sword energy comes back. Whereas like different with fusion rifles, right? The lower the charge time is how fast you can actually shoot the fusion off. So kind of the opposite, and has nothing to do with fusion rifles. I just like to confuse the piss out of you. Now, currently values are not showing up in dim yet for charge time, so I don't really know how this fluctuates certain swords with random rolls, but just to take Black Talon here, which has a charge time of 75, this somehow equates to 3.68 seconds to fully charge back my sword energy. Have no idea how the math works there. I do know that my throne cleaver is somewhere around that 20 charge time, which somehow equates to a little more than 5 seconds. So just know, charge time, the higher it is, the faster you get your sword energy back. The lower it is, the longer it takes for your sword energy to come back. On top of that, your sword energy will not replenish itself unless the sword is actually in your hands. Bungie did this purposely because it actually amplifies our heavy attacks pretty greatly, actually. We're talking about anywhere from 125% increase there in damage all the way up to 200%. So Bungie's way of like balancing this extra damage is that if you want to take advantage of that sword energy, you can't stow the sword, which is where the beautiful exotic Stronghold comes into play. Now, this exotic comes with the exotic perk Clenched Fists, allowing us to guard more effectively and more noticeably against harder hits. Now, after playing with Stronghold, I noticed that it does not tank our sword energy meter, but only slightly, and immediate guards also heal you. Something to take note of about Strongholds though, despite the ability to help out with that guard efficiency stat, it does not appear to affect charge time whatsoever on our swords. So now that we've talked about everything involving the changes to swords, let's get into some damage values. Swords actually have quite a punch. If you take advantage of that full sword energy, timing it with your heavy attacks, and depending on the sword, especially the rolls on those swords, you could pump out some crazy damage. So the first sword that we wanted to test is, of course, Throne Cleaver. This is actually from the Heroic Menagerie. It is considered an aggressive frame sword. It actually has a very unique heavy attack that only Throne Cleaver and Crown Splitter both have. Now, it states that heavy attacks are stronger with full energy, as well as attacks being able to bypass elemental shields, or at least partially. I didn't test this completely with the elemental shields. We more or less wanted to know just damage values today on static targets such as Greg. Now, Throne Cleaver by itself with 77 impact, yes, this is masterworked. I'm also combining mine with Tempered Edge, which gives it that +1 there in impact. It has a 50 ammo capacity. Its light attack does 20,845 damage, and its heavy attack does 27,794. Now, a fully charged heavy attack, that meter completely full with something like Throne Cleaver without any perks being activated, does 62,535 damage, which is pretty insane. That heavy attack, fully charged over a base heavy attack, is doing 125% more damage. Now, my roll is unique, but not the most unique. It doesn't have Shattering Blade, which I'm quite upset about, but it's whatever. We've got the main perk that we wanted to test, which is Counterattack. Now, Counterattack states that blocking an attack immediately after guarding increases damage for a short duration. Now, that duration used to be a beautiful 5 seconds. It was gorgeous. And before the patch notes last season, I was so excited to try out my Throne Cleaver with Counterattack, as I have seen this earth-shattering damage before. Unfortunately, that has been nerfed, and Throne Cleaver and Counterattack only last for a whopping 2 seconds. 2 seconds! So unfortunately, this kind of messes up. But the damage values were still impressive. A light attack with Counterattack does 31,268 damage, and a heavy attack does 41,690. Pretty nice buff. But this actually jumps up even more when you are fully charged with sword energy, all the way up to 93,802 damage. Now, there's some difficulty in proccing this correctly, because guarding does take away sword energy, and Counterattack only lasts for 2 seconds. This is Bungie's cruel way of making life hell for my fellow Titans. Thank you, Bungie. With this small window, we now have to decide our new attack revolution, because before it was 2 light attacks and a heavy attack, which could be done in ease in that 5-second duration. I tried so many times today to do that, and it would not let me. It was like right outside that 2-second window. Maybe you could pull it off. Instead, what I had to rely on was do 1 single light attack. And the reason why you do that is, number 1, you're throwing in some extra damage with your light attack, and number 2, this actually allows your sword energy meter to completely refill. Now, the only way I could really do this effectively was actually with Stronghold gauntlets. That charge time, man, is abysmal on Throne Cleaver, as well as its guard efficiency. I mean, it's not the best. So if you're looking to get this attack revolution down, a single light attack into a heavy attack will net you full energy only when utilized with strongholds. Now, granted, if you're able to guard, say like a single shot from like a Scion, and it's like the bare minimum damage, then you could probably get away with it and still effectively use Throne Cleaver with Counterattack and full sword energy. But for the most part, considering you only have 2 seconds, you're not just up against Greg's nuts, you're all up in them, which is almost required here to get this attack revolution off. Now, despite all this work, it's still good damage. We're talking about 125,000 damage or more in 1.72 seconds. Now, if you wanted to take the safer route and actually fire off 2 light attacks with Counterattack and follow up with a fully charged heavy attack, which you most definitely will have full sword energy, you'll get around the same damage, but you'll be using up 1 more ammo. So something to keep in mind. Counterattack to me is a great way to conserve ammo, as well as doing a hell of a lot of damage in a short time frame. Unfortunately, it's not something that I would be able to calculate DPS on reliably, because proccing Counterattack is not something you could just do every single time at the same exact time. It all depends on when the boss or whatever it is you're trying to damage you actually damages you. A lot of this requires perfect timing, and let's just be real, it's a good chance you're dead. I'm just saying, you know, if you're in there for like 2 or 3 cycles, you're dead, man. Kind of unfortunate, and we'll get into some artifact mods which obviously keep you alive. But this now takes us to a few other weapons. Black Talon for one, as it's also a very unique weapon. It comes with an exotic trait, Crow's Wings, which allows you to actually do range attacks with your sword. Now this is actually excellent. Considering the sword changes, Black Talon allows you to step back, keep your distance from your enemies, while simultaneously doing lots of damage. Matter of fact, when we sit down and actually take a look at the damage values, we hit 12,045 damage per light attack with no increase to our heavy attack, but a fully charged heavy attack does 37,214 damage. Now that may not seem impressive to you, but understand you're able to utilize this without being in harm's way. Now if you happen to have the exotic catalyst, this actually increases the damage, stating that shots blocked immediately after guarding increases the damage of your crow wings for a very short duration. Now it's probably like 2 seconds. It's not long at all, but the benefits are still very nice, giving us still the same light attack damage at 12,045, but a heavy attack increase to 18,700. And fully charged, our heavy attack is doing 55,820 damage. Just for a point of reference, in comparison to our base heavy attack, we have a 200% increase with this exotic catalyst. Extremely nice. Now, there is a damage revolution for Black Talon, which is similar to Throne Cleaver, although I wouldn't recommend it. It's the one light attack into your heavy attack combo, utilizing the exotic catalyst. It can net you a 67,865 damage value, but it puts you up close to your enemy, which is the opposite of what you're trying to do here with Black Talon. Distance is your friend here, and that's the whole reason why you're using this exotic sword, and the whole reason why it's exotic. And considering that the catalyst doesn't even boost our light attack, I would highly recommend, if you're going to be using something like Black Talon, wait for that sword energy meter to completely refill, then proceed to proc your exotic catalyst and launch those attacks. The only downside of this is, number one, this obviously takes more time, although I will say that 75 charge time on Black Talon does make up for it, and it does burn 4 ammo. Every heavy attack with Black Talon fully charged burns 4 ammo. Something to keep in mind, Black Talon, as well as every other sword that does not have full energy, will only burn 1 ammo, which is why we're always going to recommend here to utilize light attacks until your sword energy meter actually refills. Now, a couple of other swords that we looked at. Gold Tusk was one that jumped out to us. This is actually a lightweight sword, present on the Hunter class, also rewarded from the Heroic Menagerie. It can roll with some pretty unique perks. The most beneficial one is probably Surrounded with Surrounded Spec, giving us some pretty crazy damage values, jumping up to 17,541 damage per light attack, 23,680 damage per heavy attack, and fully charged, we're hitting 52,621 damage. Now granted, this is not as good as Throne Cleaver, but where Gold Tusk makes up for it is the speed in which you can do these attacks. The downside is that Gold Tusk also has a charge time of 20, so you might be waiting a second for that heavy attack to come back around. Granted, you can just sit there and do light attacks, and if you got something like Surrounded and Surrounded Spec, that buff is extremely nice. The downside of Gold Tusk, though, is in order to proc Surrounded and Surrounded Spec, you gotta leave ads alive, which can really screw you up. You're already taking damage from the boss or whatever it is that you're doing damage to, on top of a bunch of ads that are also peppering you. Despite the buffs that we see here with Surrounded and Surrounded Spec, in some scenarios, it's just not worth it. And the next sword we wanted to test was actually Worldline Zero. Now, Worldline is just a weird animal all on its own. Pretty sure everyone just utilized it as a weapon for speed running. No lie, this is like the first time I really messed with this thing. It does 12,405 damage per light attack, which is nearly the same as Black Talon, 14,886 damage per heavy attack, but when fully charged with our sword energy, that jumps up greatly to 42,385 damage, which is actually more than basic Black Talon without the exotic catalyst. Now, you probably noticed the status effect Temporal Sprint, which is popping up. That's actually caused by the exotic trait found on Worldline Zero called Tesseract, which allows us to launch a heavy attack while we are sprinting. Now that buff is actually pretty nice, throwing our damage up to 62,025 damage, although it does require you to be sprinting in order to activate this buff, which may actually prove to be pretty decent in certain activities. You sprint in, you do the full damage of your attack, and then you sprint away while holding your sword, building up that sword energy, and then you just cycle back in. Not the greatest for DPS, but either way it goes, that temporal sprint is still a very healthy buff there over the base heavy attack by a whopping 316%. Now, it's really hard to just narrow down which one of these swords are the best because they all present something that allows them to be better than the other depending on whatever it is you're doing, which is why I just want to focus on the perks, the things that did get changed quite greatly, as this will allow you to just go after certain swords based on these percentage buffs. Surrounded plus Surrounded Spec for both our light and heavy attacks here on swords gives us a 31.6% increase in damage for both our light and heavy attacks. And again, this does apply to fully charged heavy attacks. Counterattack is a 50% buff for both light and heavy. On guard, used to be 50%, got a nerf. It's now been dropped down to 30%, which is kind of a bummer. And it does appear to be somewhat bugged, as I couldn't get it to properly activate on my heavy attacks unless I was airborne. Now, to be honest with you, I have no idea if this is something that's just affecting Throne Cleaver with On Guard, but On Guard was actually giving us a damage value of 81,295 damage, but only if I performed the heavy attack while I was in the air. So you would actually swap to your weapon, because again, the quick swap is what actually rewards you that 30% buff. And if I did just a simple heavy attack, fully charged with sword energy, it only gave me a damage value of 62,535 while my feet were on the ground. And I just happened to notice that when I was actually off the ground while doing the swap, it bumped that damage up to 81,295, which is pretty nice. We're talking about almost up there with counterattack. Now, granted, On Guard has a very small time duration for that buff, similar to something like counterattack, which made for certain revolution cycles to be somewhat difficult to proc, which takes us to our other trait, Whirlwind. Now, Whirlwind actually got a nerf itself, but not in its damage values. Bungie states that the effect will now also end if the player guards, and multi-hit attacks no longer count as more than one hit, which kind of sucks, considering that all swords can cleave, which means they can hit multiple targets. Would have been great here for Whirlwind Blade, but it's whatever. Essentially, though, rapid sword strikes increase the weapon's damage for a short duration, although guarding does end this effect. Now, my Death Razor here is an adaptive frame sword in that 66 impact archetype with a 62 ammo capacity. We also have some decent damage values, starting at 14,003 damage, amplifying all the way up to 18,203 damage at Whirlwind times 5. Now again, this Whirlwind effect and this buff stacks with each light attack or heavy attack, but it appears to only go up by 1 with each attack landed, even if you do kill multiple opponents. Now, this damage buff starts off as a 6% buff at Whirlwind times 1 and goes all the way up to a 30% buff, and when combined with our full charge heavy attack at Whirlwind times 5, we're looking at a 62,195 damage buff. Now, Whirlwind, despite it might not having the best damage values, has a lot to offer, because number one, proccing this perk requires one thing and one thing only: for you to just simply land attacks. It doesn't require you to run away. You don't have to sit there and wait for your sword energy to come back, as you're getting the benefit each and every single time as you land one of these attacks, granting you that 6% buff with each stack. And normally, with the way the charge time is for most of these swords, by the time you get the Whirlwind times 5, your sword energy should be back or close to it. And then as soon as it comes back, you do your heavy attack with both Whirlwind times 5 with your sword energy full. Honestly, I found Whirlwind Blade to be excellent just because it allowed you and rewarded you for doing consistent damage. Even though the other ones might have more impressive damage values, they require a lot of setup. Now, with all this being said, what is the best swords in this sandbox? That's the difficult one, guys. I would say all these swords are great. I think the more impressive ones to me today, Gotus with Surround and Surrounded Spec is still a phenomenal choice. Throne Cleaver, if you could effectively block with it, especially when you paired it with Stronghold, still did fantastic damage. Death Razor, or pretty much any sword with Whirlwind, especially when combined with certain perks, say like Relentless Strikes, to grant yourself back ammo as you land those attacks. Fantastic perk combination with great damage. And as far as our exotics go, I still have to test them more. Black Talon does appear to be doing good, but it burns significantly more ammo and does less damage than all of our other swords. The only saving grace to that exotic is that it has a catalyst that bumps up that damage quite nicely, but does extend that duration there because you have to effectively proc it, which in team engagements can be somewhat unreliable. And as far as like Royal Line Zero, I still have to get the exotic catalyst for it. Hell, guys, I don't even know what that catalyst does. But as soon as I get that completely unlocked, we'll be testing that sword in its full potential. Today, guys, was more or less an overview of what you should seek out on your swords. The only perk that we did not cover here was actually Shattering Blade, which I hate that we didn't. I do not have a sword on me with Shattering Blade. I know, right? Terrible. This perk states that if your heavy attack consumes the last of your ammo, it deals significantly increased damage, excluding aerial attacks. Now, that bonus got nerfed, though, with update 2.8.0. Used to give us a 3 times multiplier. Now it's only 1.67. Now, granted, you could utilize something like that in combination with a full sword energy meter, which might give us some crazy damage values. Although over extended damage phases, Shattering Blade was not really that reliable. I loved it with things like counterattack though, and if you happen to have a Throne Cleaver with Shattering Blade and counterattack, we actually reviewed that one in the previous sandbox, and I still think that could be a fantastic role in the current sandbox. It just has a smaller window due to that duration nerf for counterattack. So we have a lot of swords on our menu, guys, as well as a new perk found on Honor's Edge, which is called Flash Counter, which states that melee's blocked immediately after guarding, disorients, and weakens the attacker. So you can imagine certain stop mechanics from barrier champions would proc something like this trait. I have no idea what the weaken effect is or how much it actually debuffs them, but we will be reviewing that sword individually here in the next day or so. So guys, that is swords in Sandbox 2.8.0. This is arguably the biggest change I have ever seen to swords in all of Destiny, which kind of has us speculating that an exotic sword could be on the horizon. Hell, this time last year we thought Dark Drinker was coming back, right? So guys, try them out today. They really are a lot better than what you think. They do require you to be uncomfortably close to your enemies, but when proccing certain traits and utilizing that full sword energy, you'll be amazed by the damage these weapons can put out. Fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching, and as always,
slap that like button like your mama told you right.